recording. Hello, everyone. I'm Audrey Coleman. I'm Associate Director and Director of Museum and Archives at the Dole Institute of Politics. As you can see, I'm not at the Dole Institute. I'm at my home office, talking to you from my home, just like so many of you are working and spending a lot of time at home. So I hope you're all well and comfortable. As many of you know, we are opening this series called the Digital Dole Institute and offering a bunch of new features, and I'm really pleased to take this opportunity to visit with you all and recap a wonderful project that we've been a part of over the last few years, the exhibit called The League of Wives, Vietnam's POW MIA Advocates and Allies. And some of you might remember this exhibit debuted at the Institute in 2017. And I am so pleased to chat with Heath Hardage Lee, who's the Dole Archives Curatorial Fellow, who's with us from her home in Virginia. And Heath is the author of the book of the same name. And we just wanted to chat a little bit back and forth and talk about the beginnings of this project. So welcome, Heath.
Thank you. It's fun to see you again and to chat about this wonderful collaboration we did together.
Yeah. So will you take us back to the very beginning of your project or your research? How did you get into this subject, and how did you learn about the Dole Institute and come to work with us?
Sure. So I'm a biographer and a curator, and I had just finished up my first book and was looking for a second book. I had worked with the Virginia Museum of History and Culture in Richmond, Virginia, for a number of years, being on and off staff with them, and was brought some papers from a woman who had donated her papers to that particular museum, a woman named Phyllis Galante, who was also a friend of my mother's. I'm from Richmond, Virginia also. And they brought me these wonderful papers of Phyllis's. Phyllis was an activist during the Vietnam War for the POW MIA cause. And in Phyllis's papers, I kept coming across Senator Robert J. Dole and how helpful he had been to Phyllis and the National League of Families that she eventually helped head up. So I realized that I needed to go to the Dole Institute and Archives and just kind of see what they had, see what old papers they had, or diaries, letters, primary sources that might help me with this story, as I was about to write a book, which is now called The League of Wives, the same as the exhibit title, about all these courageous women, the POW MIA wives across the country. Phyllis just being one of thousands of people in this organization. So it brought me to the Dole Institute. I applied for a grant, and you and the Dole folks very kindly gave me the grant so I could drive. At that time, I was living in Des Moines, Iowa, so it wasn't that far. And I just got in the car, drove, and spent, I guess, 3 or 4 days kind of going through the Dole archive. And as I say all the time, and people kind of laugh at me, but archives are sexy. There is a lot of stuff in there. They are juicy, delicious. There's all kinds of historical tidbits and morsels, bits of interesting stories that are in there. And I very quickly saw that Senator Dole had been one of the few men, the few persons in Congress that did anything to help the POW MIA cause. During Vietnam, the war was very unpopular, and the POWs and the MIAs were a very underserved, neglected group. And the women who were advocating on their behalf were not listened to, were told to keep quiet by the Johnson administration. And really until President Nixon came in, were not listened to. But Senator Dole had a sense of compassion, being a veteran, being a wounded veteran. I think he had a real connection to this community, and he supported these women from the beginning. And I just found so many wonderful examples of that: constituent letters, diaries, telegrams, all kinds of things in your archives. So after that, you and I had talked, and some of the other staff, about all these amazing things that I found. So later on, we were able to collaborate on this wonderful exhibit at your request, and I was excited to be your inaugural curatorial fellow in 2000. 17. So that was really exciting for me as an independent curator to get to do that. But what was the most exciting was just finding these treasures in your archive.
Oh, yeah. So what so much I like about this story and the exhibit is that it really showcases the women's leadership across the country and around the world, really, and that Senator Dole was kind of this early and important influence and supporter of theirs, but the story is really belongs to the women, and so that is really cool to be able to showcase that with the exhibit. So the project started out as a book, and most people don't. So when we're thinking of researching for a book, they think words and paper. They're not thinking objects. So how did you find objects, and how did you come across these objects? I think that's a fascinating aspect of your work behind the scenes.
Yeah, this was really cool. And also, from the other end, book publishers don't usually love for you to do additional projects, when you're writing a book. But in this instance, it helped a ton. It made the book and the exhibit so much richer to do an exhibit and a book kind of simultaneously. And the publishers came around to seeing that. The way that it happened was really because first I had come to your archive and found all these wonderful primary source documents, but also the women that I was working with, interviewing for the book, who were leaders in the POW MIA movement, kept giving me boxes of stuff, of clothes, of jewelry, of diaries, like things that I was using for the book as well. But I thought, I shouldn't have these at my house without gloves on. Like, they really need to be in an environment that's safe. They were just dumping them, like it was groceries at my house. So I thought they really needed a safe environment, but they added a layer of real richness and material culture, of course, being so important in every era. But I think in the 70s, maybe even more than others, the 60s and 70s, with the clothes that they were wearing, music, things like that. It seemed to beg for an exhibit. And so it was really because of all these items people were giving me. And a lot of times stuff their kids really didn't want. I mean, none of us think our parents are interesting. So we're not listening, even when they are heroines, as these ladies came to be. A lot of times, the families weren't particularly interested in the artifacts, but I was vitally interested. And I know you all, being historians and archivists, were interested in them too. So it kind of all just came together right at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Like over tens of thousands, literally over 100,000 people have seen this exhibit since it started at the Dole Institute and around to traveling sites around the country. And we'll talk more about those later on. But what are some of the objects that are your favorites, or that that folks have been seeing when they've been visiting this exhibit?
Well, Audrey knows me well enough to know that the clothes are always my favorite, like always. I collect vintage clothes myself, so I just had a heyday with the outfits, and started, unabashedly soliciting any outfit I could get from all these wives. There are so many cool things. Sybil Stockdale's pink wool suit that she wore to the White House on a number of occasions, Patsy Creighton's yellow silk Nixon gala evening gown from 1973. Andrea Rander had an outfit she wore to Paris to confront the North Vietnamese. I mean, these are laden with so much history. So I love the clothes. I also loved an object which I think has probably been maybe our showcase object, is the POW bracelet chandelier that Porter and Marty Halliburton gave us, which was kind of more of a mobile sculpture really than a chandelier, but it was hung in the Halliburton's breakfast room after Porter, who was a POW, came back. And it was a sculpture made with 14 pounds of POW bracelets, all of which had Porter's name on it. So that was such a creative use of these bracelets, which are a real symbol of the Vietnam War. That is what so many people know when they think of Vietnam or associate with Vietnam. So I would say those are a sampling of some of my favorite objects, but there are hundreds. And I loved how we had each community bringing in their own objects to customize it for each location. In Coronado, for instance, the Stockdale family allowed the giant oak table where basically the POW MI movement was born around this dining room table. And it was massive, and God knows how much that thing weighed, but they had it refinished, and it was the centerpiece of the exhibit. So it was, I just think that was really cool, that customization at each location allowed for us to see so many different objects each time. So the exhibit is always dynamic, it's never static.
Heard a little, I heard a whale from off camera. Pardon me.
Very appropriate to the times.
That's what life at home is like, isn't it?
That's right.
So you mentioned Coronado and the Stockdales, the Stockdale family. Would you name some of the women who are featured in the original exhibit and some of the communities that they represent? Because that's really important. That kind of builds our map for the traveling exhibit nationwide.
Sure, that is really important to do, because these women were from all over the country. The POW-MI movement started under Sybil Stockdale. She's really the founder and the leader of this movement. It starts in Coronado, California, near San Diego. So of course, there's that community. Then Virginia Beach is the other epicenter of this movement at the beginning, which is, the late 60s, early 70s. Virginia Beach, Norfolk area, we had Jane Denton, Louise Mulligan, Dorothy McDaniel, Jamie Schutte. There are a whole bunch of gals from there. And then Phyllis Galante, who got me into the story, the woman whose papers I found originally, was from Richmond, Virginia. And those wives didn't have a naval base there, so they did a lot in Virginia Beach. Then, of course, we have kind of what I call the interior West and Midwest. We have Kansas, of course, right where the Dole Institute is. And that's where we have one of the MIA wives we showcase, Kathleen Frisbee, who at that time was Kathleen Johnson. Her first husband, Bruce, was MIA, but Kathleen was, she's part of that Kansas. There were a lot of Kansas POW MIA families. Then also Colorado Springs, where the Air Force is another big community that we draw from. Helene Knapp is someone who is very important in the story, an MIA wife who becomes one of the becomes one of the national coordinators of the National League of Families, which is the POW MIA advocacy group. So we really cover the whole country, starting on the West Coast, moving to the East Coast and Virginia Beach area, and then moving interior to Kansas, Colorado, Midwest, and the West, and eventually becomes a national movement.
I think that's so cool. Again, how it starts locally, these pockets of women leaders, and then they network and they gather in Washington, D.C. and create something with national and international influence. It's just such a beautiful story all around, and I'm so glad that we've been able to tell it in this way. In the future, we're going to be talking with Leah Withrow, who's a curator at the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum. And that, of course, was our first offsite. Once the exhibit closed at the Institute, it moved in 2018 to Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum. And you had a relationship with them, both with this story and before, didn't you?
Yes, I always joke with Leah about all roads lead to Colorado Springs, because my first book and my second book both kind of sprang out of my work with the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum there. My first book, Winnie Davis, Daughter of the Lost Cause, was actually about Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. His daughter, Winnie Davis, was the subject of my first book. And the Davis family, many of them moved west after the Civil War was over, because there was no work in the South, and for various reasons wanted to escape that sort of Confederate past. So I ended up with my first book working with a lot of the relatives who lived in Colorado Springs, a lot of the relatives of Jefferson Davis, and worked with Leah Withrow, and in her archive found amazing photographs of Winnie Davis, my subject, with her sister, Margaret, who had moved to Colorado Springs, found all kinds of cool things there, spoke there, had a long relationship with them. And when I was speaking about my Winnie Davis book in Colorado Springs in 2015, I mentioned at the end of my talk that I was going to be writing this book about the National League of Families, the POW MIA movement. And several of the board members in the audience said, well, you've got to speak to Helene Knapp, who is, you know, an MIA wife who is super active in the National League. And so that museum connection led me to this another really key person in the story of the League of Wives. And then it was very cool how the Dole Institute and the Colorado Museum were able to come together to host this exhibit. And it's funny how small the world is. There is so much interconnection that you just don't even know about. So now I always make a point of, I always talk about what I'm doing next, because inevitably someone will know someone in the audience who can help you or connect you. So that was just a neat coincidence.
Yeah. And even more, the Colorado Springs connection served us even more closely when we were planning the exhibit project, because interestingly enough, the donors who ended up supporting the development of this project, Harlan and Alice Ann Oakes. Harlan was formerly of Russell, Kansas, and knew Bob Dole, grew up with Bob Dole, and had made Colorado Springs his home, his permanent home. So he and Alice Ann generously supported the development of the exhibit, and we were able to take it to their home community and obviously see how far the exhibit has grown. So we're really proud of that. I think we've done a really bang up job with
yes,
support.
and the Oaks they really made it possible for us to make this the exhibit that we had dreamed of doing. I mean, without that support, I don't know if it would have been able to grow the way we wanted it to grow and to be as big as we wanted it to be. So that was amazing. And again, just small world. All these connections really helped us to make it work.
Yeah. Well, Heath, thanks so much for visiting with us today. This project, you started your research in 2015, wasn't it? Like
yes.
that summer? And now 5 years later, your book has come out and is doing great in sales, and is probably going to become a movie and with this exhibit. So we look forward to talking with the curators at the other institutions in the next few weeks. Look forward to where this exhibit goes in the future. The Nixon Library is one future site, and then other sites along the way. So it's been really fun. I'm so grateful to work with you, Heath, as always, and thanks for being with us today. Everyone watching at home, be well, and we look forward to giving you more information, giving you a peek into the traveling sites that this exhibit has visited and some of the local stories that they'll have to share with you. So until next time, bye-bye.
Thank you.